this is actually an example from my book. If I told you that I believe that there was a diamond buried in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator, it might occur to you to ask me why. If in response I gave the kinds of answers you hear from religious moderates, the answers that describe the good effects of this, of believing as I do. So I said things like, well, this belief actually gives my life a lot of meaning. Or, I wouldn't want to live in a universe where there wasn't a diamond buried in my backyard that's the size of a refrigerator. I mean, it's pretty clear that responses of this sort are deeply inadequate. They're worse than that. They are the responses of a lunatic or an idiot. I mean, by responding in that way, I would have disqualified myself for any position of responsibility in a first world society. Except you change the subject to religion, to the moral demands of an invisible superintelligence, to what happens after death, and all bets are off. Then you can say anything you want.
Matter and, yeah, all of this, all of the above.
Do you give people who make this case that that was the beginning and that there had to be something that provoked the beginning, do you give them an A at least for trying to reconcile faith and reason?
I don't think they're reconcilable.
What do you mean?
Well, so let me say that differently. All efforts that have been invested by brilliant people of the past have failed at that exercise. They just fail. And so the track record is so poor that going forward I have essentially zero confidence, near zero confidence, that there will be fruitful things to emerge from the effort to reconcile them. So, for example, if you knew nothing about science and you read, say, the Bible, the Old Testament, which in Genesis is an account of nature, that's what that is. And I said to you, give me your description of the natural world based only on this. You would say the world was created in 6 days and that stars are just little points of light, much lesser than the sun. And in fact, they can fall out of the sky, right? Because that's what happens during the Revelation. One of the signs that the second coming is that the stars will fall out of the sky and land on earth. So to even write that means you don't know what those things are. You have no concept of what the actual universe is. So everybody who tried to make proclamations about the physical universe based on Bible passages got the wrong answer. So what happened was, when science discovers things and you want to stay religious, or you want to continue to believe that the Bible is unerring, what you would do is, you would say, well, let me go back to the Bible and reinterpret it. Then you'd say things like, oh, they didn't really mean that literally, they meant that figuratively. So this whole sort of reinterpretation of how figurative the poetic passages of the Bible are came after science showed that this is not how things unfolded. And so the educated religious people are perfectly fine with that. It's the fundamentalists who want to say that the Bible is the literal truth of God and want to see the Bible as a science textbook, who are knocking on the science doors of the schools trying to put that content in the science. Enlightened religious people are not behaving that way. They're saying, yes, science is cool, we're good with that, and use the Bible to get your spiritual enlightenment and your emotional fulfillment.
I have known serious religious people, not fundamental.
But it's kind of suggestive. It kind of says, you know what, we're all human beings. We should all learn to live together. We should let people be happy, and achieving those kinds of goals is how we should set up the society in which we live. So the bad news for Rick Warren is that he was wrong. It is all about you. God did not give you a purpose to living. That, in fact, the universe doesn't give you a purpose in living either, but that doesn't mean that there are no purposes to living. It does not mean that you cannot find meaning in your own personal life. It's that you have to create it. You have to create it in a way that is compatible with what we know about science, but there's more than one way to do that, and it's ultimately up to you what to do, as long as your reasoning is compatible with how the universe works. So I'd like to close by showing this image. It's a little bright in here so you can't see it, but probably you've seen it before. This is the Hubble Ultra Deep Field. This is what you get if you take your camera and you point it at a blank spot of the sky, and you open the shutter and you leave it open. As long as your camera is attached to the Hubble Space Telescope, what you will see is that the sky is not blank, that it is full of galaxies. Within the observable universe, there are about 100 billion galaxies. Within our own Milky Way galaxy, there are about 100 billion stars, so roughly 10 to the 22 stars, just in the observable part of the universe. Every little blob here is a galaxy roughly the size of the Milky Way. So there are all sorts of, well, I guess they wouldn't call them humanist conferences, but there's, alienist conferences going on there, and they're looking pictures at us. And the point is that we human beings are really, really, really tiny. I know that some people are able to look at this picture and say, oh, the glory of God and creation, isn't that impressive? I can't imagine looking at this picture and thinking that the reason for this is so that I can be here. But what I can do is I can turn the camera around. This is the famous pale blue dot photograph that Carl Sagan had taken. This is the Voyager 1 spacecraft, 4 billion miles outside the Earth's orbit. They turned it around. They took a picture. That little speck, that 1 pixel, is us here on Earth, trying to drive home the fact that we are indeed very, very tiny. But despite the fact that we are tiny, we have turned the tables on the universe. We have lived for a very short period of time. We extend over a very tiny region of space. We're not that massive or complicated, really, and yet we can look at these pictures and we can understand them. We can capture all of this glory in our brains and contemplate it and think about ourselves and tell stories to ourselves about what it all means. And it's that creative act of discovering what is in the universe, making meaning and purpose for ourselves, that gives life its essential importance to us. Thank you.
And there's a whole galaxy, it's about 1 billion light years away. We're looking at it as it looked 1 billion years ago. So many of those stars no longer exist. And here's an object that's just as bright as the whole center of the galaxy. You'd think it's a star that's near in our galaxy that just got caught in the picture frame. It's not. It's a star on the edge of that galaxy that has exploded. And exploding stars shine with the brightness of 10 billion stars. They're the brightest fireworks in the universe, supernovae. And they're remarkable, and I keep having asides. Maybe I'll get to my point eventually. But this is something that I wrote a whole book about, and someone asked me yesterday why I wrote that book. Because it is the most poetic thing I know about the universe. Richard wrote a great book called what's it called? Our Ancestors? What's it called? Ancestor's Tale, yes. I wanted to make sure I got that right. And I wrote a book that was a different Ancestor's Tale. It was called Adam. But the amazing thing is that every atom in your body came from a star that exploded. And the atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand. It really is the most poetic thing I know about physics. You are all stardust. You couldn't be here if stars hadn't exploded, because the elements, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, iron, all the things that matter for evolution weren't created at the beginning of time. They're created in the nuclear furnaces of stars, and the only way they can get into your body is if the stars were kind enough to explode. So forget Jesus. The stars died so that you could be here today. Okay? And anyway,
relativity is not the final theory. Nobody in the world thinks that these are the ultimate, once and for all, finished laws of physics. But they are the right laws of physics in a certain regime. And that regime is pretty big, and we all live in it. So this theory is internally complete and coherent. There's nothing missing. There's nothing that it can't explain on its own terms. No experiment ever done here on Earth has contradicted this theory. And I say on Earth because there's still the sky. And the sky tells us about dark matter and dark energy and so forth. And those are not explained by the standard model of particle physics. They are also irrelevant to your everyday life unless your everyday life is being a particle physicist. And it's settled. We're done. In July 2012, we discovered the Higgs boson. That was the last particle in the standard model of particle physics. We could still discover more particles. That is absolutely necessary. That is absolutely allowed, but is not necessary by any logic that we currently have. There's no data, there's no theory, there is no experimental evidence that we need more particles than this to explain what we have already observed here in our laboratories. So what I'm saying here is that physics falls into different regimes. You don't need to know about dark matter to explain what happens when two protons come together to form nuclear fusion. In the regime of the everyday world, in the regime that you and I live and experience as we go through our day, this theory, the Standard Model plus general relativity, explains everything we have ever seen. And I know what you're saying. Where's the equation that shows me this? Here it is. There you go. This, in one equation, is the physics underlying the world that you have experienced, everything you've ever seen with your eyes, touched with your fingers, tasted with your tongue, heard with your ears, and so forth. I'm not going to explain everything. Yet that's... Yes? You want me to explain it? All right. Here is quantum mechanics. There is space-time. There is gravity. Here are the other forces of nature. This stuff is matter. It's interesting. Electrons, quarks, neutrinos. And this is the Higgs boson. Love it as we do. And nowhere in here is there purpose, is there teleology, is there design. It's a pattern. It's an ironclad thing that the universe does. Here are the ingredients. March them forward using the laws of physics.
What's the equation name?
I don't know. Name it Sean's equation. I don't know what we... no one ever